Greg Bishop has been studying UFOs and the paranormal for most of his life. For much of that time, he is focused on what I would call the no man's land between the extremes of wide-eyed belief and compulsive debunking. This interest led to the birth of the Excluded Middle, a journal of UFOs, conspiracy research, psychedelia, and new science. It can be found online at excludedmiddle.com. Greg is the author of Wake Up Down There, a collection of articles from the Excluded Middle, and the book Project Beta, the story of Paul Bennewitz, national security, and the creation of a modern UFO myth, and a really great book in a wonderful series that I see in the big bookstores fairly regularly. His is called Weird California, and it's a portrait of strange and eerie history and places in the Golden State. And there are a few very strange places in California. His writing can be found daily at the blog site UFO Mystic, which is run by our dear friend, colleague, and great researcher and author, Nick Redfern. Greg has also written for the LA Weekly, the Fortean Times, UFO Magazine, Magical Blend, and the book-length anthologies Conspiracy and Cyberspace, Zen and the Art of Close Encounters, and You Are Being Lied To, among others. He is the host of Radio Mysterioso, which can be heard on Sundays at www.killradio.org. The show features interviews with fringe topic researchers and weird music. Hey, wait a minute, I was interviewed on that show. You consider me a fringe topic weird music person? Well, actually, I think I just answered that question. Yeah, okay. Right. And it is a great show, as is Karen's, I must say. Can be heard there. The show features as a past guest, right? I vouched for that already. He is here today to discuss alternative theories of UFO origins, and I am confident that in the process he will throw yet another wrench into a number of orthodoxies held by us UFO believers. Ladies and gentlemen, my friend and colleague, Mr. Greg Bishop.
Well, hello. I don't know if I'm going to throw any wrenches into anything. It's funny because a lot of the stuff I'm going to talk about is freely available and has been gone over by many researchers for many years. It's just that people don't really pay attention to these other theories. It always seems to be when somebody brings up UFO, it's aliens from other planets. And while it could be that, it could also be a lot of other things. And I will discuss the extraterrestrial hypothesis and what it has going for it. I had trouble going to sleep last night, strangely enough. I was lying in bed watching my little iPod, and I saw this light flashing from the other room. And I was thinking, what the hell is that? And what happened was, at the party last night, they gave us these little ice cube things, and I had thrown one in one of my drinks. And some moisture got inside, and it just started going on by itself in the other room, and there's this blue light flickering from the other room in the hotel room. I was just like, my imagination get too active? I don't know. Where's the blinkety one? Yeah, that's how they're usually going. So, yeah, if I appear to be spaced out from time to time, it's because of my my fake abduction from last night. Actually, I don't do this usually, I should thank people that put this conference together and brought all these great speakers down here, like Renee Roach, Free, Amy, Joe Jordan, Peter Robbins, who just introduced me, and of course, City of Roswell. So I am going to read most of this talk because it's rather complicated and I want everything in there. Oh, well, I already put this up. I wanted to have you guess what this quote was, but Carl Sagan actually said this in 1969. The idea of benign or hostile super beings from other planets visiting the Earth is clearly an emotional idea. There are two sorts of self-deception here, either accepting the idea of extraterrestrial visitation in the face of very meager evidence because we want it to be true, or rejecting such an idea out of hand in the absence of sufficient evidence because we don't want it to be true. Each of these extremes is a serious impediment to the study of UFOs. For those of you who know what Carl Sagan said when he talked about UFOs, that's kind of a remarkable thing for him to have said, at least in his later years, when all we know him as is basically a fundamentalist skeptic, which is a term I use rather than just skeptic, because skepticism is fine. It means that you question things and look for evidence. Fundamentalist skepticism means you've already made your mind up, hence the term fundamentalist. And one other quote from Peter Sturrock, who's a British astrophysicist. He's one of the founding members of the Society for Scientific Exploration, which is a group that examines paranormal anomalies from a scientific viewpoint. They have people credentialed scientists at universities and things like that doing experiments in ESP, Bigfoot research, lake monsters, all the kinds of things that we're interested in. And surprisingly enough, once in a while they'll say, we think there's something here, which is quite different than most people think of science when it relates to the paranormal. What Sturrock said about the UFO subject was, discussions of the UFO issue have remained narrowly polarized between advocates and adversaries of a single theory, namely the extraterrestrial hypothesis. This fixation on this hypothesis has narrowed and impoverished the debate, precluding an examination of other possible theories for the phenomenon, which is what I want to deal with today. It's difficult to step back from something as exciting as the possibility that we are being visited by beings from other planets, but that's what I want to attempt. The idea is so ingrained in our minds that some may find it distressing to consider any other scenario. I think it's more distressing that many people automatically close themselves off to all the alternative possibilities. My style is to put ideas out there and see how they hold up, not settle on one dogma and proceed to defend it against those who don't agree. I find that I learn more and get more enjoyment out of the paranormal by taking this attitude. So first off, I don't think aliens are a what you see is what you get type of phenomenon. A quick look at the available literature and reports reveal a range of appearances, from weird dwarfs to robots and even amoeba-like beings, as well as the standard gray. All of you know that image. And this is my favorite, a 1947 case from Lima, Peru, where the witness saw what he described as 5-foot-tall beings shaped like bananas with tan terry cloth-covered skin, or looking skin. That's the only image I can find. I mean, I'm not going to pick up a banana and cover it with... Yeah, it's a banana in pajamas, exactly. This wide range of different reports of different beings. Some people are not aware of this. Most people think that, aliens, when they see aliens, they see that. But once you get before communion came out and outside of the United States and maybe Britain, Western culture, people see all kinds of strange things. I mean, that's why I had those things up. I think that was from Brazil. That's an Italian case some of you may know about. To me, this diversity presents a few possibilities. One, there are hundreds of civilizations visiting us. Two, there is one or a few, and they can change their appearance to suit the situation. Or three, we're dealing with something that relies on our own minds to make a decision as to what we are seeing. Perhaps the phenomenon is a mixture of these ideas and others, which I will talk about today. I'm not going to describe some of these, it's just showing you the diversity of different reports. Anybody know what this is a picture of, what depiction this is? It's one of those, I picked it specifically because it has a little symbol on the, is there a pointer up here? Yeah. There's a little symbol right there that the witnesses reported. That was the Voronezh, Russia encounter from I think it was about 20 years ago. Some kids in a playground said this giant robot-looking thing got off the ship and kind of stood there in front of them. It sounds like Day the Earth Stood Still or something. But the symbol in the middle there was the UMO symbol, if you know what that is. It's this weird thing that looks like two parentheses on one side with a cross in the middle and a line through it, which comes from a long-running case called the UMO contacts, or UMO planet case, which actually turned out to be pretty much dismissed as a hoax, which I find very funny that there's a report from Russia with that symbol on something that walked out of some sort of a craft. So we really don't know what's going on here. It gets more and more interesting. There's no real proof as yet for any theory, except what we tell ourselves, what we think the aliens are telling us. By the way, in this talk, when I say aliens, I'm using this term as shorthand for intelligent life, which is non-human in nature, so as to keep the extraterrestrial idea as a possibility rather than a reality. As you can see, it's a very loaded term. I will also not be talking about UFOs that are explained as hoaxes, misidentifications, government projects, Nazi flying saucers, etc., because I think at the core of the UFO subject, there's very likely a phenomenon that is non-human in origin. Most of the theories I will be discussing are either outside of a strictly scientific viewpoint or at the edges of what is considered scientific discipline. People know what that is, right? That's one of my favorite cases ever. It's Kelly Hopkinsville, 1950, what was it, 52, 56? Peter, do you know? These people in a farmhouse heard a noise, and saw a light go down in a field, and then suddenly these things that look like this, they're about this tall, surrounded their house and started peeking in the windows. I have never heard any other reports with things that look like this. They kind of look like elves or imps or something. If human history has taught us everything, it's that we never know as much as we think we know. There's always something new to be discovered, new ways of looking at things, and new information that can turn old paradigms into yesterday's junk. Of course, some believe that we now know just about all there is to know about our world and most of our universe. Others, of course, believe that they know more than the best scientists and thinkers of their generation when it comes to supposed alien life. It's obvious that those who believe in Earth-visiting extraterrestrials have a long uphill battle on their hands with regards to proof and respectability in the greater culture. Or repeatability, I should have said. Those of us who don't particularly care about respectability and acceptance from either side of the debate continue to listen, to think, and to wonder. I will present the extraterrestrial hypothesis and what I think are the good points about it first. The most popular explanation for the UFO phenomenon, whether you're attending a UFO conference like this or watching the X-Files, is that UFOs and aliens are intelligent life from other planets visiting Earth. The largest groups on either side of the debate are the alien believer and the fundamentalist skeptic. The believer knows that aliens are here visiting, while the fundamentalist skeptic is firmly convinced that all UFO phenomena can be explained as everything from hoaxes to mistakes in perception. Well into the 1950s, many actually thought that the origin of UFOs was Mars, and even tried to correlate this theory with the twice-yearly approaches of the planet with the UFO flaps of that period. The ET idea has invaded, pun intended, our collective consciousness so much that it's accepted as reality by most of those interested in UFOs. Oh, I jumped ahead, I'm sorry. I'm going to talk about this thing. The idea about Mars being the origin of UFOs. This idea got a humorous kick in the butt last year with an image from 2004 from one of the Spirit Mars rovers that appeared to show something like Bigfoot roaming about on the planet. Did anybody see this? Have you seen this? Have you heard about this? Yeah, that was a picture that was just released by NASA after they're supposedly going through all their pictures. And there was a rock outcropping or something that looked just like UFO looked like Bigfoot taking a turn and running down the hill. The ET idea has invaded our collective consciousness so much that it's accepted as reality by most of those interested in UFOs. When someone asks, do you believe in UFOs? They are, of course, inquiring if you think that aliens from other galaxies are coming to Earth in structured spacecraft. But we must ask, is there any objective proof that this is really happening? All we really have are our expectations that these non-humans seem to cheerfully go along with. There's another witness report drawing to show you the variety. Some may stop me here and point out that many UFO abductees and other witnesses have told us that the aliens said that they came from other planets. And they very well may have, but why should we believe them? Are the aliens playing into our expectations to hide something? This isn't an original idea, but there are, of course, arguments from the contactee era and up to the present day on internet sites like Whitley Strieber's as to whether the visitors are telling us the truth or not. Strieber has actually argued with himself about this for many years. I'm assuming here that actual contact between humans and non-humans does indeed take place from time to time, even though there are probably many instances of misperceptions, jumbles of unconscious recollections with conscious ones, and outright hoaxes, of course. So some people will laugh and some people will get mad at me. This is actually a hoax I pulled on some friends in 1998 or so. I tied a couple of green light sticks to some balloons and ran off while we were on a camping trip and let them up, and then ran back to see what my friends said. And for about 15 minutes, they were trying to figure out what it was. They were saying, is there a swamp around here? What is that? And after about 15 minutes, one of them looked at me, and I hadn't said anything, and I started giggling, and that was the end of it. But if you look really closely, you can actually see a streak right there. There are black balloons holding it up. But anyway, I kind of wanted to see, one, play a joke on my friends, because that's what guys do with each other, and two, just to see what they would say. And nobody actually said, oh my God, it's a UFO, or we're going to get abducted. They just kind of said, what is that? And everybody sat around trying to figure out what was happening, which is what most people do. Moving on from outright hoaxing, the 1950s UFO contactees, I'm sure many of you are familiar with that story. People that said that beings were coming from other planets, contacting them, telling them various things about philosophy, live with each other in peace, ban the bomb, things like that. Basically addressing fears of people in the 1950s, and this. They claimed that these beings were coming from space, who basically looked like us. I mean, that's a painting of George Adamski's space brother friend, who he said his name was Orthon. So for these contactees, I believe that there was some initial unexplainable experience, some of them anyway, which was elaborated upon to conform with everything from wish fulfillment to concerns about personal fame to a confusion that was filled in on a subconscious level with worries about nuclear annihilation and other post-war issues. I also think that many of them told what they believe was true, and I don't really want to deny them their personal reality. Hoaxes, confabulations, and lies aside, something that appears to be non-human, flying around in the sky in apparently structured craft fits perfectly into our ideas of what aliens should be doing. Many of you know that weird things have been coming out of the sky for centuries, and people have been assigning them to whatever category fits their culture at the time. So let's take a look further at the ETH, extraterrestrial hypothesis, and see how it came to be and how it holds up. The Bible, the Quran, the Talmud, the Mahabharata, and many other ancient holy books mention non-human beings. This class of creature was assigned a spiritual status, either as messengers of gods or denizens of other worlds or dimensions. An example is this quote from the Quran, which addresses the idea. The quote is, "Among his signs is the creation of the heavens and the earth, and of whatever living creatures he has spread forth in both. And he has the power to gather them together when he will so please." This actually sounds like the sort of stuff the exopolitics people are pointing towards, what with contact between humans and aliens, but I don't suppose that they dare to quote Muslim texts these days. This is actually a woodcut of a sighting over Nuremberg, Germany in 1561. I used to have a picture from a Renaissance painting, which I've since concluded is basically something that could either be a UFO or a symbol, a normal symbol from Renaissance painting showing a ring of clouds with a light coming out of it. My degree's in art history, so I kind of lean towards the theory that a lot of those Renaissance paintings actually have what we think are UFOs are basically things we can see in other paintings that are symbols of Holy Spirit or God or whatever coming out of the heavens. It's not to say I think that's what it is, I just think it's more likely. So I thought that this better illustrated what I was saying, because this is pretty unequivocally something very strange flying over the sky. And there's accounts of it, and it was actually named as one of the 10 best UFO cases in Paul Kimball's film of the same name. Actually, the film is called Best Evidence. A few of the ancient Greek philosophers were the first to discuss a universe full of other planets and possible extraterrestrial life. Thales, this is Thales, and his student Anaximander first mentioned this idea in the 6th and 7th centuries BC. An Earth-centered universe, argued for by Aristotle and Ptolemy, favored the Earth and Earth-based life. Through a series of deductions, Aristotle actually denied the existence of other planets. Lucian, another Greek philosopher of the 2nd century AD, wrote novels about travel to the moon and other planets and inhabitants that his characters found there. In 1543, Nicholas Copernicus published his heliocentric theory, sun-centered solar system, and it gradually became more acceptable to think in terms of other planets in orbit around the sun, even though Indian, Chinese, and Muslim philosophers had been suggesting this idea for a few centuries. Communication problems and certainly religious and philosophical dogma kept all this theorizing in the background for the most part. In 1610, Galileo, having improved on the invention of the telescope, observed 4 of the satellites of Jupiter, which you can see here. You can actually see those with a pair of binoculars, I believe. Observing these satellites provided a model for the theories of Copernicus. In the previous century, Italian scientist and philosopher Giordano Bruno argued for the idea that every star could be surrounded by its own solar system. For this idea and others, he was burned at the stake by the Catholic Church. 400 years later, recently, on October 31st, 1992, Pope John Paul II and the Church officially conceded that the Earth does in fact move around the sun and apologized for the treatment of Bruno and Galileo. It took him 400 years. I guess it was an afterthought. With the firmly established fact that there are moons and planets orbiting each other and the sun, people are free to theorize about the possibility of life on them, as well as others in other solar systems. It was not until the 1990s that we had telescopes powerful enough to confirm planets actually do revolve around other stars. Present theories about the nature of time, distance, and acceleration, say most scientists, preclude the possibility of anyone coming here to visit. It would just take too long. The Alpha Centauri star system, there's actually 2 stars in Alpha Centauri, doesn't have any planets discovered around them yet, is at least 4 years away at the speed of light, discounting the fact that the journey would take less than a year of apparent time for the crew at speeds approaching light. It just seems that it would be too long for any civilization to take the time and effort to make that journey. In 1960, astronomer Frank Drake formulated an equation which guessed that there might be between 1 and 1 million worlds in our galaxy with civilizations advanced enough to communicate with us, depending on variables that are plugged into the right side of the formula, which I'm not going to explain because I don't remember what the components of the formula are. It has to do with star formation, planets with the right environments, and stuff like that. In 2005, the Journal of the British Interplanetary Society published a paper that called Standard Theories of Long-Distance Space Travel into Question. In the paper, with the tongue-tying title, Inflation Theory Implications for Extraterrestrial Visitation, the authors used leading-edge physics to advance a theory of multi-universes. They argue that other intelligent species may have figured out a way to jump effortlessly between our universe and their own, using their knowledge and technology to travel almost instantaneously to any time and place that they desire. This paper also discussed the possibility of bending space in our own universe so that voyagers from distant galaxies might be able to momentarily bring their immediate cosmic neighborhood right next to our own and cut out the travel time. There was a lecture given on this at one of the MUFON conferences, I think in Irvine, about 6 or 7 years ago, and while the scientist, it was Eric Davis, the scientist there thoroughly confused most people. What he was trying to explain was that in theory, right now, this is not a science fiction thing, you could actually take space and bend it so that something that seemed far away, that is far away, folded, in normal space way out here, if you had the right equipment and enough energy, which is, I guess, so much energy that they can't possibly do it right now because it would just take too much. You actually bend the space around and pop through this way instead of coming all the way this way. That's a kind of a three-dimensional way to look at it. It's obviously much more complicated than I've explained it here. So the possibility does exist that we are being visited by extraterrestrial civilizations, but we're still left with no objective proof of such contact. So let's look at some of the problems with the extraterrestrial hypothesis as it is known, and I'm going to partially borrow here from the work of Jacques Vallée, who some of you might know about. First is the unlikely similarity of many of the aliens to humans. There does not seem to be anything in nature favoring an upright two-legged form. Why are the aliens so humanoid in appearance? Could this be a symptom of our own expectations coloring our perception? Do we see what we think we are supposed to see? I think there's a good case for this idea. Second is the frequency of the sightings. If there's some sort of expeditionary force visiting this planet, why do they need so many? And why do they need to gather so many soil, plant, and DNA samples? Wouldn't just a few be enough? Also, if they wish to be secretive, they're doing a pretty poor job. Third, there's the incredible diversity of reports regarding the shape and size of the craft. How many different kinds of alien races could be visiting us all at once, and why do they need so many different models to travel here? And finally, if these aliens are so advanced, why do they repeat their actions endlessly? The whole phenomenon sometimes seems like a strange act of performance art, designed to confuse us, or even to make us believe in something. There are other possibilities that have been discussed for many years, but most aren't easily reduced to simple nightly news babble, which makes it difficult for people to hear about them, and why I'm covering them here today. I get the feeling that people think that I don't think there's aliens coming here and there's no UFOs, and I'm very skeptical about it. But that's not the case at all. What I think is that there is something here. It's not human. It interacts with us. But the nature of that interaction is playing into our expectations, and I think that holds back research into where these things actually come from and what it is. What it is, what they are, whatever you want to call it. So the first possibility I'd like to talk about is the time travel hypothesis. Could our non-human visitors be time travelers from our world? In other words, people from our future who come back in time to have a look at us and perhaps see where we went wrong? This comes up on Coast to Coast every once in a while. Time tunnel. This is a relatively popular idea, which seems to have come about in the 1950s for ufologists and other people who were unhappy with the ET explanation. At the time, this seemed dangerously close to science fiction. It still does, but advances in theories about how to travel through time have made it apparently more acceptable, even though the details of the actual time traveling have not been worked out yet. Here's another joke. One problem with this theory is that we must accept time as a linear phenomenon. If time is flowing from future to past with the now in the middle, funneling all probable futures into probable past, then which future are the time travelers coming from? There's another way to model time so that travelers are not simply coming to the past to affect a future that will not be there and may not even include them when they return, which is also known as the grandfather paradox, usually expressed in the statement, if you traveled back in time and killed your grandfather, what happens to you? You've heard about this, right? If we look at time as something we experience as physical mortal beings, we look at time as something we experience as physical mortal beings, while the real situation may be something more like an every when. In other words, everything that has happened or will happen, or even could have happened, exists without reference to time. If you could move away from the flow of time in which we think we are caught, every probability would exist simultaneously. This may be in fact what is happening, and so-called time travelers are really beings who have escaped from the clutches of the time flow. It's sort of like the bending of space theory that I described before, except nothing is bent. There'd be no time to travel through. It might be more like switching stations on a TV, and you would need to sort of tune or lock yourself into the time flow of the destination you wanted. Does that make sense? I see any nods? All right. This sort of reasoning might also account for the so-called Oz factor, which was coined by British ufologist Jenny Randalls to describe the sense of unreality experienced by some witnesses to the paranormal. You've read these reports where people say time seemed to stop, or all the sounds went away. There's all the crickets stopped going and all the birds stopped singing, or people. It might also account for missing time, those kind of things. My theory here about, or my discussion here of the time factor. This sense of unreality is called the Oz factor by Jenny Randalls. It might also account for reports of appearing and disappearing UFOs and aliens. By a lucky coincidence, it also reaches into other areas of the paranormal, like ghosts, which could be events or people unstuck from time flow, or even Bigfoot, who perhaps exists outside of our time and pops in occasionally from our point of view. The second theory I'd like to talk about is aliens not coming from other galaxies or planets, but being something that is very close to home and in fact may be part of our own environment, just as we are. Another theory of UFOs and aliens is that they are not alien at all, at least not in the way we would traditionally think of them. In his 1955 book called Case for the UFO, Morris K. Jessup wrote this interesting piece of quasi-prophecy, and this is a quote from Morris Jessup, that's him. "It's no longer necessary to explain them as visitors from Mars, Venus, or Alpha Centauri. They are part of our own immediate family, a part of the Earth-Moon binary planet system. They didn't have to come all these millions of miles from anywhere. They could have been here for thousands of years. Whether we belong to them like a possession, like cattle, or we belong to each other by common origin and association is an interesting problem, and one which may soon be settled if we keep our heads." I got to repeat, this was written in 1955, and I don't really hear anybody talking this way now. Jessup became progressively more paranoid and finally committed suicide in 1959. Oh, there's a video coming up. His book was actually reprinted by the Office of Naval Research, which included comments by a drifter and teller of tall tales named Carlos Allende, although the Navy did not know who this man was at the time. Was the government interested in the idea of aliens who had shared the planet with us? Did they warn off Jessup? He never made any public statements to that effect, but secrets are sometimes dangerous things. Most of his friends believe that he simply was in a deep depression. Jessup's relatively unknown theory has been gaining in popularity and has been expanded upon recently by author Mac Tonnies, much to the very public chagrin of old-line alien defenders. And he's just now completing a book on this subject, Mac is. He calls his theory the crypto-terrestrial hypothesis. The idea is that beings native to Earth have been here long before us and have advanced to a state that we cannot distinguish from an extraterrestrial civilization.
The crypto-terrestrial hypothesis basically sort of maintains that we are sharing the planet with a species that's possibly as far in advance of us as we are from chimpanzees in certain areas of development. Not necessarily everything. We obviously have some things that the alleged crypto-terrestrials, or CTs as I refer to them for brevity, don't have, like a global infrastructure. I think it seems likely to me that the CTs utilize imagery that we associate with extrasolar aliens to disguise their presence, to kind of mask where they're coming from, and to throw us off the scent. I think one thing that this secret civilization among us has going for it is a very prolonged, maintained, and very well-cultivated sense of stealth. I think that they thrive on secrecy. I think that's a big asset. I think they're flesh and blood. I think a lot of them could possibly pass for human. And I think that they share the planet with us, and I think they're nomadic. And it seems to me that they are here to stay, in the sense that they've been here a long time. If you look at folklore, we find recurring references to them in different disguises, but then again, that seems to be kind of the hallmark of the whole thing. I think that UFOs are their latest disguise, because we automatically associate that with aliens from other planets. And there's nothing inherently unsound about the extraterrestrial hypothesis, and it's not mutually incompatible with the cryptoterrestrial idea, but nevertheless, I think that when we look at the evidence of like hybridization programs like Bud Hopkins and David Jacobs, I don't see what sense that would really make if it's an extrasolar species interacting with us. Why they would have any interest in human DNA like they're alleged to have. On the other hand, if we share a common ancestor with these beings, these people, it begins to make sense. And when you look at certain cases that have reproductive overtones, it's very interesting to consider that we're dealing with a genetically impoverished species right here on Earth that is utilizing us for genetic stock, because it's very likely that if the cryptoterrestrials are indeed real and indeed sharing the planet with us, that they are marginalized and that they have a very compromised population. if that's so, then they might very well need to replenish their genetic stock from time to time. And to do so under the auspices of being aliens from another star system, another planet, would fall right into kind of what we expect. And it would be the perfect smokescreen, I think. I think it would be very effective, and I think it would fool a great many people. And if you look at popular culture, where we tend to be fascinated by accounts of aliens, to the point where the word aliens is synonymous with the extraterrestrial hypothesis. But I don't think the extraterrestrial idea is the final word. I think it's worth considering, but I also think that the idea that we're sharing the planet, as ludicrous as it may sound when you first consider it, has some good circumstantial evidence to back it up and to complement some of the ideas associated with it. So I wouldn't rule it out at all, and I think it's a real intriguing idea, and the more I look into it, the more credible I find it.
Yeah, well, Mac is writing a book about, I don't know if it's called the crypto-terrestrial hypothesis, but his idea, like he said there, if it wasn't clear, is that there is a civilization that is probably mostly human, has been here for a long time, probably longer than we would know, and may account for things like, as he said, DNA experimentation and all those things that abduction researchers say is going on, because if their DNA is close to us, it would make sense that they would have an interest in it. Maybe there's something wrong with their race, who knows. These are all theories. I'm playing with ideas here. I'm not coming out and saying that the extraterrestrial hypothesis is wrong, or that I'm right, or that any of these things are more true than others. In fact, I think a lot of these things I am presenting have just as much going for them as the extraterrestrial hypothesis. And I think it would be fruitful for us to look into these things because, like many people, I'm frustrated with people coming before me, before us, looking at the UFO problem and not really coming up with anything except to say that there's aliens coming from other planets, with no real proof of that except what we think would be the proof, if you know what I mean, kind of a circular reasoning. Also, I like when people come out with different ideas, even if they seem wrong on the face of it. Put them out there in the public, let people kick them around and see how they hold up. And maybe the answer to whatever UFOs and what we think our aliens are will come from one of these other areas. And I will continue by talking about John Keel, who some of you may know about. He was quite active. He's still alive. He was quite active in the 1960s, wrote some very important books that a lot of people in the UFO subject have not read, or if they have, discount them because they do not fit in with the extraterrestrial idea. So back to the text a little bit here. For those of us weaned on the ideas expressed in books like Operation Trojan Horse by John Keel or Passport to Magonia by Jacques Vallée, the theory is attractive, the cryptoterrestrial idea. It also resonates with indigenous and folk wisdom from throughout history. I had to put that in. I went and talked to John Keel a couple times. Very nice guy, and I was lucky to be able to speak with him a few times in person. Keel's idea is that UFOs and aliens are involved in a game of... his idea is that UFOs and aliens are involved in a game of deception to keep their appearance and intentions secret from humans in order to pursue an agenda known only to them. He hypothesizes that these intentions are probably not in our best interest given the nature of many UFO encounters. His hypothesis is known as the ultra-terrestrial theory, meaning the origin is looked at as neither specifically Earth-based nor coming from outer space, but somewhere, or indeed somewhen, in a way that transcends these boundaries, as I talked about before. You can see how his ideas kind of percolate up and inform what I'm saying. Most Native American cosmologies, at least the ones of the Southwest, trace their origins to the Earth, or within the earth rather than the sky. The Hopi, the Navajo, and Zuni tribes all have creation myths that involve mankind's exodus from underground to the surface. And as many of you know, that's why the kiva, the ceremonial enclosure that goes underground, found in most southwestern ruins, and indeed in many of the tribes in New Mexico now have the same thing, have a hole in the middle called the sipapu, which is the symbolic opening to the earth, the Mother Earth. where life was emerged. There are also countless stories of underground ruins in the Southwest, such as a rumored cave in the Grand Canyon, said to be filled with alabaster and gold artifacts. And there's also prospectors' tales of a vast underground complex somewhere underneath the Panamint Mountains of Death Valley, which I have gone looking for with friends, and we could find nothing. Maybe we have to go down some mines with hard hats and ropes and hope we don't kill ourselves. The artifacts reportedly found in the Grand Canyon were described as Egyptian or Tibetan in this article from the April 5th, 1909 edition of the Phoenix Gazette. No one has been able to confirm any of the details of the article, but curiously, the area mentioned is permanently off limits to visitors and most national park personnel, according to researcher David Hatcher Childress. I'm continuing with this idea of aliens, or whatever we think are aliens, being native to this earth and possibly coming from underground. Once again, I am playing with ideas here. There's also the apparently made-up stories of Richard Shaver, who said that voices came to him from his welding equipment and told him about two races of people who lived underground, who were the remnants of a pre-Atlantean race who left the earth long ago. After the stories were published in serial form by Ray Palmer in his Amazing Stories pulp magazine, along with careful hints from Palmer that the stories were based in fact, the circulation on Amazing Stories jumped by 30%. The whole story was later published in a book called I Remember Lemuria, and some people still take these stories as gospel truth. A friend of mine who is in the Air Force Intelligence, or was in Air Force Intelligence, and that's not Richard Doty, by the way, if some of you are wondering, says that the military has long had an interest in caves and other underground features, and not just as hiding places for secret operations. He also claims that the Roswell crash involved beings from under the earth, not above it. And he actually wrote an article in Fate magazine about this about a year ago. There might also be hints that this theory is true in numerous sightings of USOs, unidentified submerged objects that appear from underwater and return there. It's possible that the alien civilization that McToney's talks about is found underwater, which is, of course, the last great, largely unexplored realm on our own planet. As far out as it may sound, is the idea that our visitors may be some type of Atlantis civilization any weirder than the idea of little gray men visiting us from Zeta Reticuli? I don't think so. In any case, the idea that alien does not equal extraterrestrial is one of the more compelling theories of UFO origins, which leads us into our next theory, UFOs and aliens from inner space, which I will explain presently. Where else might our aliens come from? One line of thought is that non-human beings reside in a different dimension to our own, but can be experienced when conditions are right, either through accident or intention. This can be related to the time travel hypothesis, of course. One of these possible conditions has been a subject of hot debate for many years. This is Canadian scientist Michael Persinger, who claims that UFO experiences are the result of natural magnetic fields and their influence on the human mind. He actually built a football-like helmet device that, when used to stimulate certain areas of the brain, caused what Persinger said were typical abduction and UFO experiences. Some of you may have heard of Persinger. I don't think I totally agree with him, because he says that all UFO experiences are based on his theory, which I think does not cover everything at all. However, it is interesting to consider as an influence. Like everything we're discussing here today, it doesn't explain everything, just like I said. The research is compelling, though, and it echoes the earlier studies of Canadian neurosurgeon Wilder Penfield. While conducting research on epilepsy patients, Penfield actually electrically stimulated different parts of the brain while the patient remained awake so that they could describe to him what was happening. He hoped to map out areas of the brain that were affected by epileptic seizures. In some of the experiments, though, stimulating certain areas of the temporal lobes gave people strange spiritual-type images, some of them bordering on what we would now call near-death experiences. Delving further into more controversial territory, we come upon the work of American physician Dr. Richard Strassman, who was given permission by the DEA, Drug Enforcement Administration, to conduct scientific research into the effects of the psychedelic drug dimethyltryptamine, or DMT, From 1990 to 1995, Strassman worked with 60 volunteers at the University of New Mexico, right up here in Albuquerque. Assisted by hospital nurses, he administered DMT to his subject and sat by to observe and record the reactions. There was extensive debriefing after the sessions to note anything that was not described vocally during these drug trips. About half of the volunteers met up with something that they described as alien during their experiences. The research was described in his book DMT, The Spirit Molecule. At first, Strassman had trouble even admitting that the alien-like encounters were going on. An excerpt from his diary, which I'll read here, shows his growing concern with something decidedly unscientific that was happening to his research subjects. And this is the quote: "When reviewing my bedside notes, I continually feel surprised in seeing how many of our volunteers made contact with, quote, them or other beings. Research subject used expressions like entities, beings, aliens, guides, and helpers to describe them. The life forms looked like clowns, reptiles, mantises, bees, spiders, cacti, and stick figures," which actually is what some people have described in abduction experiences that don't have anything to do with these drugs. It's still startling to see my written records of comments like "they were these beings," or "I was being led," or "they were on me fast." It's as if my mind refuses to accept what's there in black and white. He was struggling with the idea that these people were seeing things that he didn't really have a space for in his scientific training. And, trusting that they were reporting what they saw and it wasn't just coming out of their minds because of the drugs. He has now changed his mind to the point where he says that I think there is some kind of external reality with some kind of intelligence that can be accessed through this psychedelic drug. I know talking about drugs bothers some people, but I think it's a result of our culture. People have been using things to change their consciousness for thousands and thousands of years, and in their societies, it was used as a sacred thing to access this other world I'm talking about, not to escape this world and drive around and run people down accidentally, etc. Speaking about these entities, another of the participants said, "They do seem interested in you." This is a quote. "In people, especially in their feelings. It was interested in my fear and in me." If you're familiar with the abduction literature, these phrases and descriptions are exactly what is reported by people who claim to have been taken out of their beds or cars or wherever and led onto machines that look like spaceships. Some of the DMT subjects even talked about medical exam scenarios. And I must say that some of the people that had these experiences swore to Dr. Strassman they had not read abduction books and knew nothing about it. They kind of were aware of it through the culture, but they described details that a lot of abduction researchers used to keep secret because they wanted to confirm that somebody was having an actual experience. So if these things are happening on drug trips, what's going on here? Terence McKenna, this is Terence McKenna, who passed away a couple years ago, was a psychedelic researcher and author, and he thought that UFOs were manifestations of the collective soul or unconscious and were guiding us along some sort of evolutionary path. McKenna wrote and talked about his experiences under the influence of psychedelics, including a memorable trip to the Amazon when one morning he observed what he described as a perfect George Adamski-type saucer sailing over a river. This was not under the influence of any drugs, and he didn't know what to make of it at the time. Perhaps there was something in the sky, but his mind chose to frame it in this ridiculous context. He's perhaps best known for his encounters with something he called self-transforming machine elves, seen when under the influence of DMT. He described these entities as playful, curious, and yet immensely wise, eager to teach as much as to learn. This echoes some of Whitley Strieber's descriptions of his visitors. Thousands of others have described similar encounters to these. Perhaps these are not mere hallucinations, but a manifestation of the continuum of consciousness of which we are all part, but are perhaps only dimly aware of our place within it. McKenna had much to say on the nature of reality, consciousness, and our current views on these intimately related subjects. Much of this was discussed in his famous book, True Hallucinations. So a normal reaction to these findings would be, so what? People are seeing aliens on drugs. I know lots of people who have done that. Well, there are two reasons why this could be very important in our quest to find where these others, in quotes, come from. The first is that this was a scientific study with a control group. This is Strassman's study I'm talking about. In other words, people who had not administered the drug, and extensive documentation of the whole process. The second reason is not so obvious, and that is, what if we turn this idea upside down and consider that the imagery was not coming from inside the subjects' heads? Did the DMT allow people access to a sort of non-time, non-space realm and meet intelligences who reside there? I think it's an important question, and one that most UFO researchers will not think about for fear of being considered crazy. Since that's what most people think of most ufologists, what's the problem? We should go where the answers are leading us, don't you think? Yes, do we make UFOs? This is also controversial, meaning do we make them in an interaction with something else? This is the so-called manifested thought forms idea. Many of you have heard of this one too. There's a tradition amongst Tibetan Buddhists, there's something Tibetan I put up there so I could talk about it, that certain advanced spiritual practitioners can will things into existence. Some of these exist as specters or incorporeal objects, while others may take on a life separate from the original creator. Here's a quote describing this probably a little better than I can. Some of these are said to be a perceptible double and etheric counterpart of a living person who is undergoing an out-of-body experience. Even more mysterious are the externalized manifestations of something whose existence originated in the mind of its creator by virtue of that person's incredible powers of concentration, visualization, and other more occult efforts of the mind. In Tibet, where such things are practiced, a ghost of this kind is called a tulpa. A tulpa is usually produced by a skilled magician or yogi, although in some cases it's said to arise from the collective imagination of superstitious villagers or of travelers passing through some sinister tract of country. Some researchers have extrapolated this idea to UFOs and aliens, hypothesizing that witnesses or someone in the immediate area call these things into existence. My take on this idea is that during or maybe just before a UFO encounter, there may be something in the vicinity of the witness that uses unknown and untapped powers of their unsuspecting minds as a tool to make themselves seen and also to leave traces of their passing. There's Nick Redfern. I took that picture of him. It looked like he was manifesting a thought form, so I included it in this. Nick Redfern is a fan of this idea and put it this way in a recent interview. He said, "My view is that the reality behind the UFO phenomena is somewhat tulpa-based, in the sense that it appears in a fashion that is acceptable and believable to the culture and society of the period in which it manifests, such as demons and gods to the people of ancient times, or fairies and goblins of the Middle Ages of England, or long blonde-haired contactee-style aliens of the 50s, and of course the emotionless black-eyed grays of today." Occultists have likewise claimed for centuries that they are able to call up spirits from the elemental world, which are called, of course, elementals. These notoriously uncontrollable beings are supposed to help practitioners of the occult arts with whatever goals they are trying to achieve, be it information, some sort of influence on the imaginal realm, or the effects of our mundane world. Of course, these practitioners have claimed for many years that aliens are simply elementals doing a magician's or even their own bidding, meaning the elemental takes on its own life after being called into existence. This is an engraving of the 16th century philosopher, statesman, and magician John Dee and his assistant Edward Kelly in a rather fanciful depiction standing in a magic circle and calling up the dead, which they never actually claimed to have done, but I think this was put out as a kind of a sensationalistic treatment of their experiences. They did claim communications with a spirit that taught them a strange language called Enochian, which actually has parallels in the UFO literature, such as this writing, channeled by contactee George Hunt Williamson, in which he called the Solex Mal. If any of you are familiar with the Andreasen stuff, Betty Andreasen, and the books by Raymond Fowler, they have an entire alphabet, alien alphabet, that they said came from these beings that visited them. And they, the strange thing is that her whole family, Betty Andreasen's family, started to write in this language and channel it. I had a friend who's passed on now named Mario Pozzaglini, who went and talked with Betty Andreasen and her family and had them channel some information, and he looked at the symbols, which I don't have with me here today, this so-called alien writing, and he tried to translate it, and the only phrase he could translate out of it, which I really like, was said something like, "If you want to make light solid, show it to the moon." I don't know what that means, but it's a very beautiful phrase and supposedly came from whoever Betty Andreasen has contact with. If you don't know about the case, she's an abductee who has experienced some kind of contact with something not human for 20 or 30 years now. There's also Jacques Vallée's idea that what we have been seeing since 1947 is a continuation of the fairy, elf, demon, or jinn lore, which has been with us for many centuries. Fairy Yurduzu will talk about this in the lecture coming up. Many reports of alien entities contain virtually the same playful, confusing, or even evil activities that these supernatural creatures were supposed to be visiting upon the populace of the ancient Middle East and Europe. Whatever UFOs and aliens ultimately turn out to be, it is likely we will find that they have been with us since before the invention of the written word. This can be seen in the marked similarities in the experiences of alleged alien abductees, which seem to mirror those of people from earlier times, although they are now filtered through a different cultural lens. The old hag, the succubus, and the alien invader all share common characteristics that cannot be overlooked, and which may point to an intelligence that, while alien, is not necessarily extraterrestrial. Our point of view, which is nurtured by genetics, our upbringing, our education, our environment, and other intangible forces that form our personalities, is probably the most influential aspect in what we ultimately believe are the origin of UFOs and non-human entities, or even if they exist in the way that we generally understand something to exist in the external world. There is so much conflicting information available and so many unknowns in this field that no matter what your inclination, you will most likely find at least some data or at least a preset belief system to back up your emotional reaction. It could be argued that using some of these admittedly wacky theories to explain other unknowns is like the blind leading the blind. But to me, there are very compelling inroads to be made with the information that we have available and that I've presented to you today. As a result of thinking and writing about this subject for almost 19 years, my ideas might seem a little strange to most people, even people who study UFOs. I'm not really a classical UFO researcher. I haven't gone out in the field and interviewed witnesses in many, many years. I found nothing new along that path, at least nothing that really interests me. What does interest me is the data collected by those who have, as long as they do in a systematic and even a vaguely scientific way, if they can, and more importantly, paying attention to the data that does not fit our preconceptions. There's little that science can do about solving the mystery of UFOs come from, at least the way that science is practiced now. This is one of the reasons that some of these crazy theories I've talked about today should be interesting to those who seek an explanation, since it forces us to come up with new methods of investigation. Perhaps this non-human force is egging us on into areas that are unexplored in order to make us evolve intellectually, and maybe spiritually, because in some ways the UFO subject forces us to blur the line between the two. Instead of calling for a separation of science and spirituality, a constitution, if there could be one of ufology, might do itself a great service in calling for a limited blend of these things, right and left brain working together, in other words. Another tributary in my thinking involves something a friend of mine called the symbolic realm. This hypothetical dimension would exist outside of space and time. It will only be accessible through our minds, or more precisely through our consciousness, since this is the only part of our beings that are not time and space bound, so far as we know. It is our imagination, but an imagination informed by the knowledge of all that has come before us, allowing us access to other times and places. If there ever is such a thing as a time machine, I don't think this device will be something we just sit in and adjust dials. It'll probably be more like some mechanism that opens up our minds to receive information that will be experienced as what we may call dreams, but we will be consciously aware of everything that is happening and able to remember it. At that point, we may actually be the aliens flying UFOs over some perplexed civilizations' farms, military bases, and small towns. Perhaps the effect of this will also leave physical traces and allow us corporeal form in that other world. It may also be at that point when we will become unbound from time and achieve some sort of immortality. The Hindu idea, actually I think a lot of religions have the same idea, that a creative force brought the universe into existence in order to experience itself, may apply to our whole race, since wandering around in the ether might get boring after a while. At this point, we might meet these aliens and find out that they are indeed us. Thank you.